My name is Steve Ellis. I'm a co-managing partner for the RISE Fund, a $5 billion impact investment fund that was founded about 5 years ago by TPG, one of the world's leading alternative asset investors. And thanks for being with us today. Before we jump in, I just wanted to point out that we're really excited to be one of the underwriters of Aspen Ideas, because we share the belief that bringing together innovative thinkers, business builders, responsible risk takers is actually one of the best ways to tackle the biggest challenges we face as a planet and as a global society. And at the RISE Fund, we're trying to do our part by expanding the reach of commercial capital, helping a new generation of entrepreneurs build high growth and profitable businesses that deliver net positive social and or environmental impact that can be actively measured and verified. So today I have the pleasure of speaking with one of those dynamic entrepreneurs who leads a business that is having an enormous impact here in the US in these very challenging times we're experiencing, and how they're affecting our education system. I'm pleased to welcome Jessie Woolley-Wilson, the president and CEO of DreamBox Learning. Jessie and her team have developed an award-winning K-8 digital math program that provides personalized and adaptive instruction that dramatically accelerates learning gains. And Jessie, as it so happens, is also a 2007 Henry Crown Fellow and a moderator for the Aspen Institute. So this is a bit of a homecoming for her. So Jessie, thank you for joining us, especially given this is such an incredibly busy time for DreamBox.
I'm happy to be here, Steve. Thanks.
Well, Jessie, let's maybe start with just a simple description of the DreamBox product, how it works, and why it's seen such great outcomes for students.
So imagine the best teacher you've ever had in your life in the most resource school available with 30 kids in front of her. How does that teacher know what each of those individual students need moment by moment? Even the best teacher in the best circumstance can't do that. That's where technology can come in. So what DreamBox Learning does is it collects information not only about did they get it right or wrong, but how they're thinking through the problems, which demonstrates their deeper understanding, their conceptual understanding of mathematics. So essentially, DreamBox can help the learning guardian, the teacher, the parent, the tutor, the math coach, understand where each kid is in their learning path, and then give them actionable insights so that they can modify their live instruction to complement where that child is and to optimize the learning experience. So it's moment by moment dynamic adaptation based on how kids are thinking and based on what they've demonstrated they've learned to the point of mastery.
Yeah, I think I've heard you use the term, it learns the learner while the learner learns.
That's pretty good. DreamBox learns the learner as the learner learns. That's exactly right.
So with that, obviously, the DreamBox has had a lot of success across the K-8 and K-12 landscape for the better part of the last decade, but the world has changed. There's no question that the pandemic has created tectonic shifts in the way that students and administrators and parents are being stewards of the education process. And give me a bit of a sense for what you're seeing on the front lines as you guys are working with those families, those administrators, those teachers who are wrestling with this new reality.
So what we saw was a lot of uncertainty. Were schools going to stay open? Were they going to reopen safely? What was a parent to do? If I'm a parent and I work, now I'm responsible for the full-time learning progress of my child while I'm working? How do I do that? It was chaos. So what we wanted to do was to say to both learners and learning guardians, you have a lot of chaos in your life. The one thing we don't want you to have to worry about is math. If that's one thing that you don't have to worry about, you don't have to worry about it if it's on DreamBox. And many of the parents who had seen a glimpse of DreamBox leaned into DreamBox and have come to a deeper appreciation for what it is doing to build the confidence and the competence of their child's learning. And so for us, we were a product forward company. We have about 40% of the people at DreamBox are former educators. And so we understand what happens in a classroom environment, what should happen, what's good, what's bad. And when this pandemic happened, we had to find new ways to move beyond creating product to actually be a source of support and consolation, really, to parents who were fearful that they were going to make some catastrophic mistake that was going to harm their kid for years to come. And that's among the haves. That's among the haves. It was a completely different scenario if mom or dad drove a bus or was a restaurant, worked in a restaurant and didn't have the privilege of working remotely from home. Maybe they were a nurse and they were an essential employee. How do they guide the learning of their child when their child is home full time and they have to get up and leave the house because they're an essential worker?
So Jessie, DreamBox wasn't designed with the idea that learning would happen largely at home for any extended period of time. And obviously the pandemic hit quickly. And as you say, you pivoted, by actually allowing school districts to get an unlimited number of licenses to DreamBox. But the product, how well has the product translated to the learn at home environment, given all the challenges you just described?
So I love this question.
Any changes?
Yeah. So what a lot of people don't realize about DreamBox was that in its original conception, it was a consumer product. It was built by former Microsoft executives who wanted to make sure that their kids had an augmentation of what they could get in the classroom, because they wanted them to be able to compete internationally, and they wanted them to have the best possible math instruction that would build a conceptual understanding of mathematics so that they could be problem solvers in their lives and in their jobs. And then we pivoted because we saw that it was a transformational technology, and the last thing we wanted was to have this transformational technology increase the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So we decided in 2010 to take it to schools, to take it to where kids were. So regardless of the zip code, regardless of how aware or how educated their parents were about technologies like DreamBox, they could have access to it. And that meant we had to make it more robust. It wasn't necessarily going to be used, one child on the kitchen table or in their bedroom at night. It was one to many. So that meant we had to add reporting. We had to add things to help district administrators, principals, teachers, coaches understand what to do with Mary and with 10 Marys, with Johnny and with 10 Johnny simultaneously. And so what we did during this pandemic was rely on some of the essential ingredients of our value proposition that were part of its original conceit when it was a B2C. We prioritized student engagement. We wanted kids to want to spend time on DreamBox when we first built it. And we did not have some of the problems that other learning technology companies had, which were really designed for teachers first. We designed it to make sure that the learner loved to spend time learning math on DreamBox. And that paid off for us in this pandemic, because we have kids asking, Mom, can I spend more than an hour a week on DreamBox? And we have parents calling us, so my kid wants to spend 4 hours a day on, no. 4 hours a day is too much. That's not what we want. But that's a good problem to have, and one that other technologies don't enjoy.
So Jessie, let's turn maybe to a topic I know that that you're deeply passionate about, and something you and I have spent a lot of time talking about, and that's the issue of equal access and inequality in our education system, particularly the public education system. And we as a country, and a lot of people don't actually know the facts around this, have actually made a lot of progress on ensuring that we have equal access to digital solutions in the classroom, right? And that's typically measured by things like, a device per student, the sort of one-to-one ratio in schools and in classrooms, and the availability of broadband internet to be able to take full advantage of these technologies. And over the last decade, we've made a lot of progress in the classroom on those important enabling capabilities to allow all students to benefit from the power of digital curriculum. But now that we've moved a lot of the learning to home, we've created a whole new challenge as it relates to access and inequality. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and the importance of this topic being sort of on the front burner as we think about back to school this year, but more importantly, the important priorities for the U.S. education system over the next 3-5 years?
So this is the one thing that keeps me up at night, the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, that gap between talent and opportunity that we were talking about. And there are a couple things I would say. One is that teachers, before COVID, teachers decided which programs you were going to use and how much time you spent on those. And you're right, most schools they have the broadband and they have the devices. After COVID, that switched to the home, to some kind of learning guardian in the home, be it mother, father, auntie, uncle, and they were determining what the child did when they were on technology, if they had the technology. So there are a couple things that are happening. First is that parents are sharing broadband with 1, 2, and 3 students, and they're seeing the cost of that go up. So even though the home is wired, there's still downward pressure because of affordability, and not all kids have access to the broadband. The second thing is that in rural communities and poor communities, largely Black and brown communities that don't have access, I call these the disconnected students. While the world is moving forward with distance learning, they are not. And we are going to have to contend as a society with, when schools do get back to some kind of normal, that there are going to be groups of students, large groups of students, who have really regressed during the time of COVID. And they used to be maybe at par or close to par with their colleagues. And now their colleagues that had access are going to have had the opportunity to advance academically. So what do we do with those kids? Do we pull them back? And so they're not with their age cohorts anymore because they've had learning losses? Do we ask them to go to school for longer hours and maybe take Saturdays away from them? Do we invest and give them more tutors so that they can have a chance to catch up? All of these considerations are going to have to be dealt with very intentionally. And I believe we're going to need to have really intentional, impactful national, state, and municipal level collaboration, not only investment, but collaboration. And we have to make sure that teachers are ready for blended learning. So even though teachers felt kind of ready when they were in a 100% virtual environment, they weren't ready for that because they weren't trained for that. We train teachers for a blended learning environment. We need to figure out a way to close that gap and to accelerate equal access.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, there have been, there's some new studies now coming out just because there's been enough time to be able to assess what's happening. A couple of them have suggested that even just the time from March through the end of the formal school year generated about a 50% learning loss for students returning in the fall. And that's disproportionate depending on what access they had at home. And
that's absolutely right. And that might even be more pronounced in the math area. I think that was across all areas of learning.
That's correct.
But we suspect that the learning loss in the math area could be even higher than 50%.
Right. And interestingly, there's been some additional work done, research just published by Common Sense Media that suggests that the access gap at home, that there is as much as 30%, and it's unfortunately highly concentrated in communities of color that don't have proper access to either the device or appropriate bandwidth to be able to learn from home in the way that the other 70% of students can.
That's exactly right. And we're talking to the Aspen audience. We're talking to an audience that has leverage and that has agency. And we have to figure out a way to get from where we are now to having broadband access and device access. As broadband access should be a utility. We should think of it as a utility. It can't be the reason why we don't unleash human capabilities through learning. And right now it's not. So we can't have chronic generational implications of lack of access to broadband because we just haven't wrestled with the hard issues. The Aspen audience is in a position to influence this, to make sure that we're doing things differently in the new normal when we all get back to school.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Listen, Jessie, we just have one more minute. I just wanted to maybe give you an opportunity to leave a parting thought. You know, you use the term learning guardian. You've taught me that that's an important term to use for parents and teachers. But if you had one message for parents and teachers out there in light of what we're experiencing in this back to school season like we've never seen before, what would it be?
I would say to parents that I know your hearts are heavy and that you wonder if what you're doing is good for your child. And I would remind you that children need to be cared for and they need to be loved, and kids are resilient, and that your best is good enough. Whatever your best is right now is good enough. And what we have to do is partner. We have to put our arms around you so that when we do get back to school, to our new normal, that hopefully we'll have more learning technologies like DreamBox, that we have to support you and your child wherever your child has landed as a result of COVID, and make sure that they accelerate, because wherever they are, they can still accelerate. The future is still bright for you and your kids.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you, Steve.